A terrified Nasat girl crouches in the rubble, her heart pounding as death closes in. Metal-clad mercenaries stalk the ruined streets of her hometown with lethal intent, hunting her just like they hunted her family. For her genes, without someone to save her, Hector will be their next victim, their next specimen. Only 12 years old, her short life has collapsed into nightmare, alone and helpless. Until she stumbles into the human outpost. Dr. Collins knows his research mission is over the second the desperate refugee appears. He's kept his people hidden from the corporations ravaging Nasatia for months. Stay out of it, that's the plan. But this changes everything. He can't let them have her, not this brutalized child shaking with terror before him. It's time for the gloves to come off. He has minutes to pack up and run before the mercenaries find them. The girl's wide eyes fix on his, begging for salvation. Can he really do this? Risk his mission, his life, for a chance to make a stand? The mercenary dropship screams overhead, troops slamming into the dirt too close for comfort. No more time to think, only act. He grabs her hand as he sprints for his ship. Somehow, against all odds, they make it aboard and blast free, the planet's surface shrinking beneath them. Hector sobs as her world burns. Dr. Collins sets his jaw, calculating the light years to safety, and the light years yet to go. He wanted to stay out of this fight. He can't now. Not with this girl counting on him. Not with what he's discovered about why the corporations want the Nasats, and what they'll do to the galaxy if they succeed. Like it or not, it's humans to the rescue. Starting with this one helpless alien girl. Dr. Collins's hands shook as he punched in the coordinates for Epsilon Station, his eyes darting between the nav controls and the sobbing Nasat girl huddled on the deck. The mercenary dropship's engine roar still echoed in his ears, nearly drowning out the hum of his own ship. He forced himself to take a deep breath. They'd made it. Barely. "It's going to be all right," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're heading somewhere safe." Hector looked up at him, her luminous eyes glistening with tears. She said nothing, just wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. Collins couldn't blame her. In the space of a day, her entire world had shattered. He turned back to the controls, opening a comm channel to the station. "Epsilon Station, this is Dr. Russell Collins of the Nasatia Research Mission. I have an emergency situation, requesting immediate assistance." There was a burst of static, then a voice crackled through. "Dr. Collins, this is Admiral Thaddeus Briggs of Epsilon Station. What's your situation?" Collins swallowed hard. "I have a Nasat refugee on board. A child. Her name is Hector. Mercenaries are after her people, for their genes." He could practically hear the Admiral's sharp inhale. "Their genes? What are you talking about, Doctor?" "I don't have all the details yet, but it's bad. The corporations want the Nasats for something. Something big. We need protection, and we need it now." There was a pause, then Admiral Briggs spoke again, his voice grim. "Understood, Dr. Collins. Proceed to these coordinates. I'm dispatching the HMV Dauntless to rendezvous with you. We'll keep you safe." Relief washed through Collins. "Thank you, Admiral. Collins out." He input the new coordinates, watching the star map realign. The Dauntless, a warship, armed and armored, a floating fortress. It was more than he could have hoped for. He glanced back at Hector. She was watching him, her gaze wary but tinged with the faintest glimmer of hope. "Help is coming," he told her. "We're going to make this right. I promise." She nodded slowly, uncurling just a bit from her protective huddle. Collins turned back to the controls, his mind racing. He had data on the Nasat genome, samples he'd collected. He needed to analyze them, understand what made the Nasat so valuable, what the corporations were willing to kill for. He pulled up the files, his eyes widening as the sequences scrolled across the screen. The Nasat DNA was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Hyper-efficient, adaptive on a level that defied belief. And there, buried in the code, the key, genes that could accelerate plant growth and evolution. Terraforming genes. Collins sat back, stunned. With this, the corporations could cut terraforming times by orders of magnitude, a centuries-long process reduced to mere decades. The implications were staggering and terrifying. He looked over at Hector, huddled in her tattered clothes, and his heart made. 12 years old, and her genetic code was the most valuable thing in the galaxy. What would the corporations do to control that? To weaponize it? He had to stop them, had to find out what they were planning and shut it down. For Hector, for all the Nasats. The comm chimed, startling him from his thoughts. Dr. Collins, this is Captain Eric Tanner of the Dauntless. We're approaching your position. Prepare for docking. Collins let out a long breath. The cavalry had arrived. He helped Hector to her feet as the warship loomed into view, all angles and armor, a silent hulk against the stars. As the docking clamps engaged with a shudder, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. The airlock hissed open, revealing a squad of armored Marines, weapons at the ready. At their head stood a square-jawed man with captain's bars on his collar. He strode forward, his gaze flickering from Collins to Hector. Dr. Collins, Captain Tanner, let's get you out of here. Collins nodded, guiding Hector forward. Thank you, Captain. We have a lot to discuss. The situation is worse than we thought. Tanner's eyes narrowed. Tell me everything. As the airlock sealed shut behind them and the Dauntless hummed to life, Collins began to talk, the words spilling out of him. The genetic data, the mercenaries, the corporation's plans. Tanner listened, his face growing grimmer with every word. When Collins finished, Tanner was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, his heart made. We'll get to the bottom of this, Doctor, and we'll keep the girls safe. That's a promise. He turned to his Marines. Lieutenant Sato, Lieutenant Commander Moreno, we've got work to do. Virtus is our target. We're going to hit that research facility and hit it hard. Rescue any Nasats we find and gather all the evidence we can. The officers nodded, their expressions steely. Collins felt a flicker of hope. With these men and women at his side, they stood a chance. They could make this right. As the Dauntless leapt into warp, Virtus glowing in the distance, Collins looked down at Hector. She met his gaze, a tiny smile on her face. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her hand. We're not done yet, not by a long shot, but we will make this right, for you and for your people. I swear it. The stars streaked by, carrying them on to the fight ahead. Collins straightened his spine, ready to face whatever came. It was time for the corporations to pay for their crimes. Time for the galaxy to see the Nasats for what they truly were. Not resources to be exploited, but a people to be protected. And he would fight for them, regardless of the cost. They all would. The game had changed. And this time, the underdogs would have the upper hand. The Dauntless emerged from warp space, Earth's familiar blue-green orb filling the view screen. Dr. Collins exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming on the datapad containing the damning evidence against the corporations. Beside him, Hector's eyes widened at the sight of humanity's homeworld. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Collins managed a tight smile. Let's hope it stays that way. Captain Tanner strode onto the bridge, his face grim. We're cleared for immediate landing at UN headquarters. The Security Council is waiting. The descent through Earth's atmosphere was tense, the ship's hull glowing as it carved through the sky. Collins felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as the New York skyline came into view. Inside the UN chamber, a hush fell over the assembled delegates as Collins and Tanner presented their findings. Holograms flickered to life, displaying genetic sequences, satellite imagery of ravaged Nasat settlements, and intercepted communications between corporate executives. The evidence is irrefutable, Collins declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. These corporations have committed crimes against an entire species for the sake of profit. Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the crowd. Ambassador Chen of China stood, her face thunderous. This is an atrocity. We must act immediately. As the debate raged on, Collins' comm unit buzzed. He stepped out into the hallway, Hector following close behind. Dr. Collins, this is Admiral Briggs. We have a situation. Collins's stomach dropped. What's happened? A mercenary fleet just hit Nasatia. Hard. They're led by some lunatic named Xavier Kress. It's a full-scale invasion. Hector gasped, her antennae quivering. Collins placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. How bad? He asked. Bad enough. We've received a distress signal from a Dr. Kaylor. Says he's Hector's father. Hector's eyes went wide. Father? He's alive? Collins nodded grimly. We're on our way, Admiral. Scramble everything you've got. They raced back into the chamber, interrupting the proceedings. Tanner took control, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new crisis. Nasatia is under attack. We need immediate action. The chamber erupted into a frenzy of activity. As diplomats argued and orders were dispatched, Collins knelt beside Hector. We're going back, he said softly. We're going to save your people. Hector nodded, her eyes blazing with grit. I'm ready. Hours later, the Dauntless dropped out of warp above Nasatia, joining a growing fleet of Allied ships. The planet below was a maelstrom of fire and smoke, mercenary dropships swarming like angry insects. On the bridge, Admiral Briggs's hologram flickered to life. Kress's forces have the planet locked down tight. We need to break that blockade. Tanner nodded grimly. We'll punch a hole, but we need boots on the ground. Collins stepped forward. I have a contact, a rebel named Talon. If we can link up with her forces, we might have a chance. The plan came together quickly. As the fleet engaged Kress's ships, the Dauntless would slip through the chaos, deploying a strike team to the surface. In the launch bay, Collins checked his gear one last time. Beside him, Hector fidgeted in her makeshift combat suit. You don't have to do this, Collins said softly. Hector's antenna twitched. Yes, I do. This is my home. The bay doors opened, revealing the inferno below. Collins took a deep breath, then nodded to the pilot. Let's go save a planet. The dropship plunged into the maelstrom, plasma bolts streaking past as it screamed towards the surface. Collins gripped his harness, his eyes locked on the burning world below. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. The real fight was just beginning. The dropship plunged through Nasatia's atmosphere, rattling violently as it corkscrewed to avoid enemy fire. Collins gripped the restraints, his squeezing hard. Hector's eyes were wide, but she held firm. Suddenly, the comm crackled. Collins, this is Talon. We've got your coordinates. Sending cover fire now. Streaks of plasma lit up the sky as Talon's rebel forces engaged the mercenary ships. The dropship touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Collins and Hector sprinted out, ducking low as they made for the nearby tree line. Talon materialized from the shadows, her four arms each gripping a different weapon. Glad you could join the party, Doctor. We've got a situation. She led them to a makeshift command center, holograms flickering with tactical data. Kress has taken the capital. He's after something in the archives. Collins frowned. The genetic data? Talon shook her head. Worse, coordinates, to some kind of hidden research base. Before Collins could respond, alarms blared. A rebel rushed in. They've broken through. Kress is retreating. They raced outside to see mercenary ships lifting off, a massive cruiser emerging from the clouds above. We have to follow them, Collins said. Talon nodded grimly. I've got a ship prepped. Let's move. Hours later, they dropped out of warp near an uncharted planet. The mercenary fleet hung in orbit, but something else caught Collins's eye, familiar energy readings on his scanner. Those patterns, he muttered. I've seen them before, in the Nasat genome. Talon's eyes narrowed. What does it mean? I'm not sure, but... The ship rocked violently. Alarms blared as a tractor beam locked on, pulling them towards a massive space station that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Stealth tech, Talon growled. We walked right into their trap. As they were dragged into a hangar bay, Collins saw the corporate logo emblazoned on the walls. His blood ran cold. Armed guards surrounded them as they disembarked. A tall, severe-looking woman strode forward, her eyes locked on Hector. I am Director Thalos, she said, her voice icy. Welcome to Project Genesis. The young Nasat will come with me. Like hell, Collins snarled, stepping in front of Ector. Thalos smiled thinly. Oh, Doctor, you have no idea what you've stumbled into. She gestured, and the guards raised their weapons. Collins felt his heart hammering in his chest, knowing they were outgunned and cornered. But as Thalos reached for Ector, alarms blared throughout the station. A voice crackled over the intercom. Perimeter breach. Multiple hostiles inbound. Thalos's eyes widened. Impossible! The hangar bay erupted into chaos as explosions rocked the station. Through the shield doors, Collins saw a familiar sight. The Dauntless leading a fleet of Earth ships, rebel fighters swarming between them. In the confusion, Talon sprang into action, her forearms a blur as she disarmed the nearest guards. Collins grabbed Ector, and they ran, ducking into a nearby corridor. We need to find the control center, Collins shouted over the sounds of battle. They raced through twisting hallways, alarms blaring and lights flashing. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of corporate security forces. Before either side could react, the walls themselves seemed to come alive. Geometric patterns swirled and shifted, the corridor twisting impossibly. Guards screamed as they were swallowed by the shifting architecture. Collins stared in awe and horror. What is this place? Ector's antenna twitched. It's alive, somehow. As if in response, a doorway materialized before them. With no other choice, they stepped through into a cavernous chamber. At its center stood an ancient machine, pulsing with energy. And there, strapped into some kind of interface, was another Nasat, her eyes locked with Ector's. Mother? Ector whispered. The Nasat's eyes widened in recognition, then pain. Her body convulsed as energy coursed through her. Stop! Collins shouted, rushing forward. But before he could reach her, the machine pulsed. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around them. As the station transformed into an ever-shifting maze of impossible geometry, Collins realized with growing dread that they had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding, and that the true battle for the future of the cosmos was only just beginning. The station's twisting corridors bent and warped around them, as Collins, Ector, and Talon raced through the impossible geometry. Reality itself seemed to ripple and distort, the walls pulsing with alien energy. This way! Talon shouted, her forearms gesturing towards a pulsing archway that had materialized before them. They leapt through, tumbling into a vast chamber that defied comprehension. Massive energy conduits arced overhead, channeling raw matter and power in dizzying patterns. At the center stood an ancient machine, its core thrumming with barely suppressed force. Collins gasped as he took in the sight. My God, it's not just a station, it's part of a planet. Ector's antennae quivered. Our world? It's artificial? Before Collins could respond, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Dr. Saros! They turned to see Captain Tanner and a squad of Marines fighting their way through a horde of corporate security forces. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as the two groups clashed. The machine! Collins shouted over the din of battle. It's destabilizing! As if to emphasize his point, a massive tremor shook the chamber. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor, reality itself seeming to fracture along with the structure. Ector, Collins said, his voice urgent, your genetic imprint. It might be the key to stabilizing the system. The young Nasat's eyes widened in understanding. She nodded, her face set with dedication. They fought their way to the central console, dodging stray fire and ducking under arcs of crackling energy. Collins's fingers flew over the alien controls, interfacing Ector's biosignature with the machine's core systems. A piercing scream cut through the air. They turned to see Director Thalos, her face contorted with madness and greed. No! The power is mine! She lunged for the console, overriding safety protocols in a desperate bid for control. The chamber shuddered, alarms blaring as the system began to tear itself apart. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room. A towering construct of hard light and alien energy materialized, its form constantly shifting and reforming. It lashed out indiscriminately, corporate troops and allies alike disintegrating under its onslaught. "Hector," Collins shouted, "you have to complete the realignment. It's the only way." Tears streamed down Hector's face as she nodded. Her small form trembled as she interfaced fully with the machine, channeling its vast energies through her very being. The construct bore down on them, reality warping in its wake. Collins felt himself being pulled away by Tanner's strong grip. "We have to go," the captain roared. Collins fought against him, reaching for Hector. "No, we can't leave her." But it was too late. The chamber imploded in a blinding flash of light and impossible geometries. As consciousness faded, Collins's last sight was of Hector, her form dissolving into pure energy as she merged with the heart of the machine. When he awoke, they were back on the Dauntless, battered but alive. Through the view screen, he saw the hollow world of the Nasat, restored but forever changed. As the implications of what they'd witnessed began to sink in, Collins knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The cosmos had revealed its deepest secrets, and humanity's place in it would never be the same. As he watched the alien world slowly rotate below, Collins made a silent vow to honor Hector's sacrifice and help guide her people into this new era of galactic history.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.